Special teams is the most underappreciated phase of the game. Coaches call it the third phase, fans barely watch it, and most players treat it like a chore. But every now and then, a guy comes along who turns that afterthought into an absolute weapon.
What a weapon he is.
Boy, he is extremely fast.
A player so dangerous in open space that kickers are literally told, do not kick him the ball. So lace up your cleats and find some open field, because these are the 10 most electric returners in NFL history. Let's get things rolling with Josh Cribbs, a guy who forced the NFL to change its rules just by existing. Cribbs went undrafted out of Kent State in 2005 and spent his entire career proving the league wrong. What he lacked in size, he made up for in vision, instincts, and flat-out speed that made coverage teams look foolish. His mentality was simple: catch the ball and go start something. He didn't wait for blocks to develop, he attacked gaps like a running back, and once he found daylight, there was almost nothing you could do about it. He told reporters he always felt like he was the best athlete on the field during returns, and he played like it. In 2009, he tied the NFL record with 2 kickoff return touchdowns in a single game against the Chiefs, turning a forgettable December afternoon in Kansas City into a personal highlight reel.
Cribbs backpedals from the goal line, finds a running lane, breaks a tackle, sidesteps another, and there he goes! Off to the races, Josh Cribbs! He's gone! Touchdown, Brown!
As a returner, he made 3 Pro Bowls and earned an All-Pro selection. He finished his career with 13,488 return yards and 11 return touchdowns. Opponents knew he was dangerous. Coverage teams would spend the entire week of practice scheming around where to kick it. Former Browns special teams coordinator Brad Seeley said Cribbs made you hold your breath every single time the ball was in the air. He never became a household name the way skilled position players do, but every special teams coach in the league knew exactly who Josh Cribbs was. That's the thing about Cleveland. They had weapons, just not always where you expected them. Speaking of unexpected weapons, our next player made an entire decade's worth of coverage teams look completely helpless. Eric Metcalf was a magician with the ball in his hands, and nowhere was that more apparent than on punt returns. The son of former NFL running back Terry Metcalf, Eric had football in his blood and elusiveness that seemed almost unfair. He was small, he was quick, and he had a gift for making the first man miss that seemed supernatural. His philosophy was to treat every return like a chess match. He said he was always thinking 2 moves ahead before he even caught the ball. And when you combine that kind of processing speed with his athleticism, you get one of the most creative returners the game has ever seen. In a 1994 game against the Steelers, Metcalf returned 2 punts for touchdowns in the same game, one for 75 yards and one for 73 yards, turning a near loss into a stunning comeback win for the Browns. The coverage teams weren't just beaten, they were embarrassed. He left grown men grabbing air. It remains one of the greatest individual return performances in NFL history. He finished his career with 9,266 return yards and 12 return touchdowns, combining both kick and punt returns, and was electric every single time he touched the ball in open space. Teammate Leroy Hoard said, "Watching Metcalf on returns was like watching someone play a video game on a cheat code. Nobody moved like that in real life." Metcalf's legacy is one of pure playmaking. With 3 Pro Bowls and 2 All-Pro selections, he proved that the return game wasn't just about getting back to the 25. It was about changing the entire complexion of a football game. And nobody understood that better than our next player who wore white shoes and threw the whole league a party every time he fielded a punt. Before there were celebrations, there was Billy White Shoes Johnson. The man didn't just return kicks, he put on a show doing it. Johnson played in the 1970s for the Houston Oilers, and he was one of the first true electricity generators in the return game, a player whose name on the depth chart made opposing coaches physically uncomfortable. He called himself an entertainer, and he meant it. Johnson said football was supposed to be fun, and he made sure everyone in the stadium felt that. But the fun was backed by serious football. He was shifty, compact, and had an uncanny ability to set up blocks and then burst through the smallest crease at full speed. In 1975, he averaged 15.4 yards per punt return, a number that was almost incomprehensible at the time. He led the league in punt return average and did it with a style that made the highlights impossible to look away from. He'd catch the ball, freeze defenders with a shoulder fake, and then explode upfield before anyone could recover. Hall of Famer Ken Houston said, "Covering Johnson on special teams was a nightmare because you never knew which direction he was going to go." Half the time, Johnson didn't know either. He just reacted. Johnson was the blueprint for the electric returner we'd see for the next 50 years. He showed the league what was possible when you put the right player back there and turned him loose. He was also one of the first players to bring personality to the position, which made the next generation of returners understand that what happened after the catch mattered too. Our next player brought that same electricity, but wrapped it in a quiet intensity that made him one of the most respected players of his era. Rick Upchurch doesn't get mentioned enough in these conversations, and that's a crime. The Denver Broncos receiver and returner was one of the most complete return specialists the game has ever produced, operating in the late 1970s and early 1980s with a precision and decisiveness that set him apart from everyone else in the league. Upchurch was methodical. He said he studied film on coverage teams the same way quarterbacks study defenses. He knew tendencies. He knew landmarks on the field. He knew exactly where the seams would open before the ball even came down. That kind of preparation is rare at any position, but almost unheard of for a returner. In a 1976 game against the Browns, he returned 4 punts for big gains and essentially won the game by himself on special teams alone. He finished that season leading the league in punt return average and earned the first of his 4 Pro Bowls. His 8 punt returns for touchdowns were a league record at the time of his retirement. Former Broncos coach Red Miller said Upchurch changed how Denver game planned offensively because they always knew they could flip the field or score outright just by letting him field a punt. He gave the team a dimension most teams simply didn't have. Upchurch was proof that the return game rewards intelligence just as much as speed. He wasn't the fastest guy on the field, but he was almost always the smartest. That combination made him nearly impossible to stop. From the Rockies to the Bayou, our next returner brought a different kind of genius to the position, one powered by pure speed that the NFL had really never seen before. Mel Gray was a human missile. The Detroit Lions returner of the late 1980s and early 1990s was widely considered the fastest player in football during his prime, and he used every bit of that speed to terrorize coverage teams for nearly a decade. Gray's mindset was straightforward. He was the fastest person on the field, and he wanted everyone to know it. He said his job was simple: catch the ball and don't let anyone catch him. And for most of his career, nobody could. When he turned the corner on a return, it was essentially over. He would hit the gas, and there wasn't anything else to do but watch him go. He was a 4-time Pro Bowler as a returner and led the league in kickoff return average multiple times. In 1991, he averaged an absurd 25.8 yards per kick return, one of the top single-season averages in NFL history. Coverage teams would kick the ball short or out of bounds on purpose just to keep it away from him, which told you everything about the kind of threat he represented. Hall of Famer Ronnie Lott said Gray was the one returner where even the best coverage team in the world couldn't feel confident because all it took was one missed tackle and it was going to be 6. He finished his career with 13,003 return yards and 9 return touchdowns. Gray was pure speed personified. He proved that when you have a true burner back there, you don't need schemes or tricks. You just need to get him the ball and get out of the way. Our next player had that same top-end speed, but added a flair for the dramatic that made him must-see television every single Sunday. There is a reason Dante Hall's nickname was the human joystick. The Kansas City Chiefs returner in the early 2000s moved in ways that dropped jaws. Cuts that had no business being made at full speed, direction changes that seemed to break the laws of physics, and a joy for the moment that made every return feel like a playground dare. Hall said he never thought about the coverage when he caught the ball. He just reacted. That spontaneous mindset is what made him so impossible to scheme against. You can prepare for a returner who goes right or goes left. You cannot prepare for a returner who does both at the same time and somehow ends up in the end zone. Between 2003 and 2004, Hall was arguably the most electrifying player in football. He returned 6 kicks and 2 punts for touchdowns in that stretch and had a string of 4 consecutive games with a return touchdown, a record that still stands. In a 2003 game against the Raiders, he took a punt back 93 yards, and the replays still don't fully explain how he got there. Coverage players had angles, but Hall made them irrelevant. Former Chiefs head coach Dick Vermeil teared up publicly talking about what Hall meant to that team and that city. He said there were Sundays where Hall was the most important player on the roster, regardless of what happened on offense or defense. He finished his 9-year career with 2 Pro Bowls, 12,397 return yards, 12 return touchdowns, and dozens of broken ankles. Hall's career was proof that the return game can carry a franchise's identity. During those seasons, Kansas City was Hall's team as much as it was anyone else's. He was electric in a way that only comes along once in a great while. Our next player had that same electricity but burned even brighter and at a position that wasn't even his primary job. Deshaun Jackson terrorized defensive coordinators as a wide receiver and special teams coordinators as a returner all at the same time. The Eagles and later Redskins wideout played with a confidence that bordered on arrogance and backed it up every single week with plays that made grown men question what they'd just seen. Jackson was outspoken about his abilities. He didn't believe anyone in the open field could stop him, and he said so publicly, repeatedly. But the thing about Jackson was that he wasn't wrong. His combination of elite top-end speed and sharp route running translated perfectly to the return game where hesitation is death and acceleration is everything. In a 2008 Monday Night Football game against the Cowboys as a rookie, he returned a punt 85 yards for a touchdown that essentially announced his arrival to the entire football world. But even that paled in comparison. As those of you who are old enough remember what he did to the Giants in 2010, fielding a punt at his own 35, breaking through the coverage, and then letting everyone in the building know he was gone.
He's at the 45. Midfield. He's at the 40. He's let it go. Deshaun Jackson. I don't care if he jumps, dives, he's running around.
In 2009, he averaged 15.2 yards per punt return. Hall of Fame cornerback Darrelle Revis said, Jackson was one of only 2 or 3 players he ever faced where a single mistake meant the game was over. Jackson's return opportunities were limited as his impact as a receiver grew, but given the opportunities other guys on this list had, we all know what would have happened. Jackson played like the game owed him something, and he collected every week. He made the Eagles dangerous even when their offense was struggling, because the threat of Jackson catching a punt was enough to change how an entire half was managed. And that brings us to a player who was dangerous for a different reason. He made every single yard he gained feel like it was earned through sheer will and work ethic alone. Brian Mitchell doesn't get the flowers he deserves, and it needs to stop. The longtime Washington and Philadelphia returner is the NFL's all-time leader in combined return yards with 19,003 return yards, a number so big it doesn't feel real. He also added 13 return touchdowns on top of that. He did it over 14 seasons with a relentlessness that never wavered no matter the situation, the weather, or the opponent. Mitchell was not the flashiest returner on this list. He wasn't going to make you drop your beer the way some of the other names will. What he was going to do was be exactly where he was supposed to be, make exactly the right read, and grind out every possible yard on every single return for over a decade. He said durability and consistency were his superpowers, and the record books agree. He blocked for himself, set up blocks for others, and understood the geometry of the return game better than almost anyone who ever played it. In a 1995 playoff game against Philadelphia, he returned a punt 53 yards that flipped the field and set up a Washington score in a game that otherwise would have been a grind. Former Washington head coach Norv Turner said Mitchell was as valuable as any skill position player on the roster because he changed field position on every single return. He didn't give you home runs every week, but he gave you 50 extra yards over the course of a game, and that added up to wins. Mitchell's career is a masterclass in longevity and production. He showed that the return game isn't just about touchdowns. It's about consistently winning the field position battle, and he won it for 14 years. Our next player would have agreed because he spent his entire career understanding how field position and momentum went hand in hand, but he also knew how to take it all the way to the house better than almost anyone who ever lived. Gale Sayers played only 68 games in the NFL. Knee injuries robbed him of what should have been a decade-long prime. And yet he is still talked about in the same breath as the greatest returners and open field runners to ever put on a helmet. That should tell you all you need to know. Sayers said he never thought about what he was going to do before the catch. It was all feel, all instinct. He trusted his body to find the right path, and his body almost never let him down. What made him special wasn't just speed or agility, it was an almost telepathic understanding of space. He saw the field in a way other players simply didn't. In a single game against the San Francisco 49ers in 1965, he scored 6 touchdowns, one of them an 85-yard punt return that remains one of the most breathtaking plays in the history of professional football. He averaged 14.5 yards per punt return and 30.6 yards per kick return over his career, numbers that still rank among the elite half a century later. He was named to 4 Pro Bowls in his first 5 seasons before the injuries took over. Hall of Fame coach George Halas said Sayers was the most electrifying runner he ever saw, and Halas had been in football since before the forward pass. That kind of endorsement from that kind of source means something. Sayers proved that greatness in the return game isn't measured in longevity alone. Sometimes a player comes along who is so far ahead of his time, so completely untouchable in open space that even a shortened career is enough to cement a legacy that lasts forever. Our final player didn't just meet the standard. He redefined it for a new generation and did it in a way nobody had ever done before or has come close to matching since. In case you were wondering, there is no debate. Devin Hester is the greatest returner in the history of professional football, and it isn't close. The Chicago Bears defensive back turned return specialist did things in open field that made coaches call timeouts just to compose themselves. He holds the NFL record with 14 career punt return touchdowns. He was so dangerous that teams literally built game plans around him. Hester's mentality was predatory. He said he was always hunting, always looking for the moment to make a play, and when he found it, he didn't hesitate. He had world-class speed, elite change of direction ability, and an instinct for finding the crease that coaches simply cannot teach. You either have it or you don't, and Hester had it in abundance. In Super Bowl 41, he fielded the opening kickoff and returned it 92 yards for a touchdown, the first play of the game on the biggest stage in football. The entire football world watched it happen and still couldn't believe it. It was the perfect introduction to who Devin Hester was. He wasn't waiting for the game to come to him. He was going to define it on the very first play. But that wasn't even his best moment. Over the course of a single 2006 season, he returned 5 kicks for touchdowns, turning entire games upside down by himself. Teams started kicking the ball out of bounds on purpose to avoid him, a strategic surrender that no returner in history has forced more consistently than Hester. Hall of Famer Bill Cowher said, "You had to account for Hester the same way you accounted for a team's best offensive weapon. Not a returner, not a defensive back, an offensive weapon." Devin Hester changed the way the NFL thought about special teams. He elevated a unit that coaches treat as an afterthought into a legitimate game-changing force. He made kickers nervous, coordinators sleepless, and fans delirious every time he caught the ball. There have been great returners in NFL history. There has only been one Devin Hester. And that's your 10 most electric returners in NFL history. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and check out our other videos.